Hello again, everyone. Thanks for coming back and visiting us. And we're at the mapping hour. This is episode number 7. Just a quick reminder, you need a login. And if you don't have one, you can get yours at esriurl.com/mapping hour. Last time we were working with data and tables and coordinates and GPS. And I hope that you're taking the opportunity to practice some of these, staying safe distance from everybody, practicing with these things. GIS is a bit like swimming. You can get a lot of benefit from watching and reading, but pretty soon you got to get in the water and try it and try it and try it again and again. It makes a big difference. One of the best cases of this is a gentleman who was asking, Charlie, what is it going to take to make this school really successful? And I said, it's just frequency, it's practice. It's the number of times people get to do something again and again, and then they get to be thinking about it all the time as they're going through their experience. That actually got translated into the way the class was operating, and they have gone to town with GIS because people had frequent experiences, and they've built up from basics to go into advanced activities. Frequent exploration allows you to get new ideas coming out. So I hope that you'll keep trying these things out between sessions. And remember, you can always stop the video and practice something and then restart the video. So we hope that you'll be doing that on a regular basis. So what are we going to do this hour? Geocoding, time-based data, publishing, ArcGIS Online organization role, and credits. We're making this shift now, going from the fundamentals. We're in the process of moving into the advanced kinds of activities where you really need to have some extra practice in those. So I'm going to turn it over to Joseph, and let me stop sharing, and Joseph is going to get you started here. Joseph?
Thanks, Charlie. Greetings, folks. Joseph here, and we're going to spend a little time on geocoding. What is geocoding? It's the process of transforming a location, pair of coordinates, city, street address, name of a place, to a location on the Earth's surface. In other words, to map it. Why do we want to map things? We want to map things not just to put points on a map. We want to map things to analyze them. We want to understand them better, their patterns, their relationships, the trends. Now, you can geocode by entering one location, as we've done a couple of times in the mapping hour. In the upper right, for example, in ArcGIS Online, Paris, Texas, Paris, France, and get a spot on the map. You can also provide a table that will be geocoded en masse as a group and map that. We'll demonstrate that. The resulting locations are output as geographic features, and then again, you can map them and analyze them. Now, why should we teach geocoding? Good question, valid question. We want to do that to map things and analyze the resulting patterns. Also, as you've seen in many of our lessons here, we've got another goal. And in this case, it's to build skills working with tables and working with data, being critical of data, understanding data. Now, what can you geocode? There's a couple of ways to think about it. First, points of interest. Think about like names from a gazetteer at the back of an atlas, mountains, rivers, or something like that. Also, coordinates based on latitude or longitude or other referencing systems. Could be universal transverse Mercator, state plane, or other coordinate systems that are out there besides latitude and longitude. You can also geocode street addresses, even intersections, house numbers with streets, postal codes. Now, there are several locations where the data in geocoding tables comes from. First of all, you can create your own tables of data, okay? And you can also bring them in from fitness apps on your phone, or from a GPS receiver, or from a GPS app on your phone, or from a probe field equipment. Pasco and Vernier, for example, manufacture these things. Some of you may have used these in the field. You can bring data from those or other field source tools. You can also bring these data tables in from ArcGIS Online, from open data portals, from your city, your county, your state, national, international government organization, nonprofits, and other organizations that host these open data portals, web pages, and other online locations. We're going to demonstrate all of those things here. Now, where can the files, the actual files that you're geocoding, be located? They can be on your own local device. They can also be up in some sort of cloud storage, Google Drive, OneDrive, etc., Dropbox. They can be on the web, again, in these open data portals. And we'll demonstrate all of that as well, okay? So we'll do a couple hands-on demos. Again, as Kylie was mentioning a couple of hours ago, feel free to pause and stop at any time. And let's do it. Okay. I have a file here on my local computer that is this. Are you folks seeing my spreadsheet? I've got a simple spreadsheet here, really basic. 2 columns, 2 fields is another way of thinking about it. City and country. I've put a couple of things in here that make you think about, how does this get geocoded? I've got 2 Parises in there, Paris, Texas, and Paris, France, okay? I've also got a diacritical mark in one of the locations there, Castellón de la Plana in Spain. So let's go ahead and geocode that and make a map out of it. Great. How do we do that? Well, inside ArcGIS Online, I've got a world base map here, and I'm going to go ahead, and I'm logged in, by the way, into my organizational subscription. I'm going to go ahead and hit this Add button, and I'm going to go to Add Layer from File. Okay. Notice the choices that we have here. We've got lots of choices. One of which is a comma-separated value or a text file. So I had that in Excel. I saved it as a CSV or comma-separated value. Great. I'm going to go ahead and choose that file right here. And there is my city-country combinations file. Now, when it comes in, we're going to say Import Layer, and it's going to say, hey, I see your field names. Now, one note here, folks, you don't have to name the fields in a logical way. Sometimes you get data from different agencies and it'll be field 1, field 2, field 3. So here is the sort of lookup table where it's saying, okay, where's the city stored? Where's the street address stored? Now, if you've done it in a logical way, you've named them, the field names appropriately. But again, if you get a table from somewhere else and you don't have control over the field names, no worries. You can indicate, oh, the city name is over in this field. So here I've got city, and my field name is called city, country, and my field name is called country. Pretty easy, so we can go ahead and do that. But notice here I've got some choices. I have data that's global, don't I? So I'm going to go ahead and say world here. Okay. And notice at the top here, coordinates, this will be important later, addresses, and none add as table. Let's go ahead and add layer. And now we've got, this is where a couple of my colleagues mentioned we've got smart mapping that kicks in. It says, okay, I see your data. Here's a way that you can map it. Do you have to take that way? No, you can modify it. In the interest of time, let's go ahead and hit done here and just accept the defaults. So now I've got this map of city-country combinations. Wow. Oh, there's Paris, Texas. And wow, there's Paris, France. Interesting. Now, one of the things that I wanted to just ever so slightly point out here is notice what happened to that accent mark on the O in Spain. There are ways to save your tables so that you can preserve those accent marks, okay? Just FYI, something to be noting for later. See how it doesn't quite interpret them correctly. But it geocodes all of the locations exactly where they were in my data table. How is that? Well, because there is a system behind these maps, right? That's what makes GIS so powerful. So there's a geocoding service that's running in ArcGIS Online. And that allows you to type in locations in the upper right-hand corner, for example, and geocode just as a single string of text. So for example, if I put Dallas, Texas, it's running the geocoding service, and it says, hey, yeah, I want to add Dallas, and I want to add that to my map notes, and there it is. So that's geocoding also. First, we geocoded a whole table, and then we geocoded a single address. Okay, let's move on. What's another thing that you can geocode? Well, we have a listing of all of our Esri regional offices, and they have street addresses. So for example, the San Antonio office is over here on Ridgewood Park in San Antonio, deep in the heart of Texas. So what I did in this case is I actually copied and pasted those addresses on that web page into a table. And so in the same way as we were looking at earlier, I've gone to add, and I've added layer from file. The result in this case is the Esri offices. Now, how do we get to the Esri offices? We're in the middle of Dallas. Remember these triple dots here? I can zoom to the location of the Esri offices. It's kind of busy, isn't it? So maybe we should change the base map to something like a light gray canvas so we can see the results of our geocoding. So there's the Esri Denver office over where I am, and the San Antonio office, the Philadelphia office, and I didn't want to neglect Charlie here, his homeland of Minnesota. Now, so those were addresses. They were street addresses, and let's just look at the table of data. It's got an address, it's got a city, a state, and a country. So when I geocoded that one, instead of saying world, I said it's a USA address set. Okay, so you can geocode street addresses as well. Now, one note about data preparation. This took a little while, right? So for me to copy and paste those web page addresses into a file took a little time, even for just 4 addresses. So the goal is to try to find a table that's already there on the web somewhere. Kylie was showing you the USGS earthquake data. It's already sitting out there as tables of data. So try to minimize your data preparation time. Sometimes you just can't help it and you have to do some manipulation. But that's not a bad thing because it teaches students that integrity of the data matters, the field names matter, how you enter the data matters inside there. Let's go to a couple of other things here, folks. One of the things I also can geocode is a text file. So for example, I have a simple exercise that I often use, and that is the mapping of 2 different kinds of businesses in a certain city. And so here I've got 2 radically different kinds of businesses. I've got bail bonds, okay, kind of clustered. Why is that? Well, they're kind of clustered around the Oklahoma County Jail. And then I've got car washes. So the lesson is about dispersion and clustering. How did I geocode that? I actually had a table of data with addresses, okay? And so another activity that's related is I actually have the students go out and grab 2 tables of data, Mystery Business 1 and Mystery Business 2. And so then they do that. They say, okay, Mystery Business 1, I don't see that. Let's go ahead and zoom to it. Okay, here it is. Remember that banding? I'm hitting the shift key and I'm grabbing that and okay, so how does this mystery business number 1 relate to, is it clustered, is it not clustered? Getting the students thinking and also vocalizing, I think, is important. The vocabulary that they're developing, clustered and dispersed and all those wonderful geographic laden terms. In this case, it's a matter of clicking on a couple of these and then they quickly determine, oh, these are check cashing places. Why are they located on busy streets? What about check cashing places in your community, etc.? Another thing that we can geocode, I think that's of interest here, is what about what I was saying earlier in those slides, that you can geocode landmarks. So for example, I have some landmarks in here. It is high points, state high points, okay? So here's a spreadsheet of the state high points, the highest point in every state. Now, Tom will be glad to know that Mount Sunflower, Kansas is on here. Indeed, and I scaled it. I barely broke a sweat, Tom, but I did scale it. So here I've got the high point, the state, and the postal code. If I map that inside ArcGIS Online, it looks like the following. Zoom out a bit. So this is the highest point in every state. Interesting. However, I see, being critical of the data, okay, there's Mount Elbert, Colorado. There's Mount Sunflower right on the border of Kansas and Colorado. But Black Mesa, in the middle of Oklahoma, that's the highest point? Why did it geocode it there? If I type in Black Mesa, Oklahoma, then the first thing that comes up is Black Mesa Drive in Oklahoma City. That's not Black Mesa, the butte that is in northwest Oklahoma. So what I'm getting at is that it did its thing. It did what it was supposed to do, and that is it geocoded those state high points. But some of them are not correct. So it circles back to our underlying theme of these mapping hour videos, and that is be critical of the data, know what it's doing. So how do I get around that problem? Well, in this case, I then created a new table that had the latitude and longitude. Notice on the right-hand side of this table, I've got a latitude and longitude for the state high points. So now, if I go back to my map, some states, I'm clicking on and clicking off, I'm comparing the latitude and longitude table with just the landmarks table. And notice that some states are different. So the one that has the latitude and longitudes, and I coded those in manually. So I looked up every one of the high points. I generated in the table a latitude and longitude for each one of those. These are the correct locations. So it all comes back to being critical of the data. Okay, I have another spreadsheet. Let me show you this one. It is the same kind of thing we were looking at before, but in this case, I've got another field in there, and I've got a photo URL in there. This has a URL where I went to that spot, and this is my tree mapping database, just 3 lines, 3 photos, 3 kinds of trees, but I have a link to the location online. In this case, it's in Flickr, as you can see. But see those JPEGs? Okay, so if I map that, what does that look like? So again, add layer from file. That's what I'm doing in all these things so far. Here's my spreadsheet of the thing that I was just showing you. So I'm going to zoom to that one. Now it's going to look pretty similar to what we've been looking at so far, but in this case, it has additional information. Notice that photo URL, and there is that point where that tree was located. And here is this point, and here is that tree. Okay, so that URL is being paid attention to when you map it. It's a latitude and longitude, but you've got an extra field, and it says, oh, I know how to deal with that. Pretty cool that you can do this kind of thing. So I mentioned in the slides earlier that you can generate, and I've demonstrated that you can generate map data from these spreadsheets, from these tables of data. But remember, we were also saying that you can actually add things from mobile devices. So for example, I have this CSV. I added a CSV. I'm going to go ahead and zoom to. And in this case, remember when I was tramping around there on the Chaparral Hills of California? Remember that? Well, here's my data from, in this case, a Garmin GPS. Again, that's just add layer from file, and that was actually generated on my GPS unit. More recently, I added some data from a fitness app, in this case, Runkeeper. Kylie will be very proud of me. So let's go ahead and zoom to this. This was my experiment. I actually was in this tunnel under the Elbe River last year in Germany. And I did a track. I recorded a track on my phone with my fitness app. And I wanted to see how close, even though I was buried underneath the tunnel and underneath water, how close that was. And you can see this is a nice teachable moment because I was on the shore. It was tracking me pretty well, but then I got into the tunnel and you can use the measure tool about 50 or 60 meters off. Okay, so I've got that. I can map those things. Another thing that I can map is a map from, for example, a spreadsheet. So if I have a spreadsheet that's in, say, Google Forms, I can actually map that. And this is a little poll that I conducted with some students of, hey, what countries have you visited? And so from the spreadsheet, I'm getting this. So it turns out that students had indicated that 5 students had been to France, etc. 4 students had been to Canada, etc. So that's coming in from a spreadsheet. And the directions are in this blog that we'll share in the resource section. Okay, let's take a look at, I mentioned data sources. So for example, many counties, cities, and other governments have these open data portals. And there are 2 ways that you can consume data. One, which has been around for decades, download the data, get a comma-separated table if you can, a comma-separated value table. In this case, I want to see where the prairie dog colonies are in Boulder, Colorado. But another thing that more data portals have nowadays is, oh, I have this, where I can download it like old school GIS, still valid, but I also have the ability to get the URL for the data service, so I can bring that in too. So back on our map, I can go ahead and say, I want to add from the web, not from a table, not from my local device, but add layer from the web. And if I plug in that URL here in this bar, in this address bar, I'm going to get the following. I'm going to get my prairie dog colonies in Boulder, Colorado. I'm going to zoom to it so you can see what those look like on top of these yellow polygons in this case. Now, a couple last bits here as we close. First of all, you've noticed that if I geocode Oklahoma City, New York City, Paris, it puts the point in the center, the centroid of that zone, that whatever you want. Geocoding Oklahoma. It's going to put it in probably Oklahoma City or pretty close to there because that's pretty much in the geographic center. That leads to a discussion that we'll have in future mapping hours about how do I turn those points into polygons, polygon data. So for example, thinking about my students' poll that I conducted, where have you visited? Wouldn't it be great to have a polygon map with the different countries shaded differently, and France would be darker because more students had visited there than other countries? More about that in future episodes. So that's a little bit about geocoding. Go out and try it. It's easy to do and very powerful. Thanks.
Thanks, Joseph. At this point, we're going to take a look at time-based data in ArcGIS Online, and we're going to do a couple things to help demonstrate what that can look like for you and how to use it. So I'm going to jump over into ArcGIS Online, and we're going to begin with perhaps a GeoInquiry some of you are familiar with. This one is called Your Huddled Masses, and it's a part of the government collection of GeoInquiries. Your Huddled Masses is about immigration, and it attempts to show immigration trends over time, as well as things like where they may go, the immigrants, green card status, and some other interesting things. One thing that we want to take a special look at here today is the ability for this map associated with the activity to display what we call time-enabled data. Now, this activity has a variety of content in it, but we're going to focus our energies today really on one layer. It's called the History of Immigration. And this one layer is all about one point. I'll move my screen around a little bit for better visibility for me. It's about one point, and that's that point at Ellis Island that has taken in so many wonderful immigrants into the country. You'll notice with a time-based layer that we have a time slider on the bottom of the map. That time slider is only visible when the layer is turned on. So the layer is currently off, now the layer is on. You'll notice our time slider has a play button. Looks a bit like an old tape recorder or maybe an old CD player play button. I suppose they're probably around in other places. And then, of course, we've got some one step forward and one step backwards buttons. These are very convenient for controlling the play of the time series. And then last but not least, we've got a configure button, which we'll go into in a moment. You'll also notice key to understanding time-based data is the indication of time that falls just below the time slider. And so what you're seeing on the map right now is an 1820 to 1830. So the data that we see here displayed looks like a little over 500,000. It corresponds to the two playheads or the two notches on our time slider, which would indicate 1820 and 1830. As we play this, we will see the time slider move to the right, and we'll see the number of immigrants change, actually increase, as we advance through each progressing decade. So I'll hit play, and you'll notice we're moving in 10-year increments. We're now up to 1870, 80, 90, 1900, 1910, 1920, 30, 40, 50, 60, and you'll see that number is continuing to grow. And of course, we've got our symbology set in such a way that our symbol actually increases the larger the number of immigrants becomes for that period. So it's pretty cool. The time slider will cycle over, of course, and begin all over. This is a time-enabled data set. What I'd like to do here is show you a couple quick tweaks that we can make under our configuration tool. One of which is the playback speed. We can basically speed it up by dragging, or slow it down in this case, by dragging our slider wherever we choose to have it. But the other interesting thing are these advanced features. So as we open up advanced features, we've got two settings right near the top, our begin date and our end date, that correspond to our timeline. This is useful if you only want to show a part of the time sequence. Perhaps you only want to show the first third of a time series event, because that's where the particular phenomena you're interested in is most obvious. So you could restrict that. In fact, in this case, we'll take it down from 2017 to, let's just say, to 1950. So we're going to get a subset of our original timeline. The time display, specify the amount of data to be displayed. And this is interesting because this actually shows you the gap or the length of time displayed along the time slider at one interval. So if you didn't want to advance by 10 years at a time, but you wanted to advance, say, 20 years or 25 years at a time, this could be adjusted inside that count. We're going to leave it at 10 years because it's a little easier to follow at the moment. The last setting that I frequently use a lot is this as time passes. And there's two options: either display the phenomena that is only visible at that time, or display it progressively. Of course, a progressive play is going to make pretty good when you have geographic distribution in your data set. A progressive display is going to make these dots pop, 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 and the screen would then fill with the phenomena. Whereas if it's simply showing what's happening at a single time period, you're going to see a snapshot in time, the data goes away, and then you'll see the next snapshot in time. So it really depends on the phenomena that you're wanting to display to the students, okay? So we're going to go ahead and hit OK with our minor tweaks made. You should notice that our time slider has now adjusted a little bit. We're now looking at, looks like 1820. You can't quite see the end of it here. Let's slide. And we'll see if I actually hit the OK to hold the dates. And yeah, so it's now only showing 1820 to 1960. So remember, we chopped off part of that to illustrate that we could. And then I'm going to go ahead and roll this back to about a 10-year increment. So this will play very similar to the way it did before. I'm going to go ahead and play it a couple times. It's advancing. I did slow down the advance speed, so that will also be affecting us. I'm going to hit pause, and then I'm going to go over to my stop forward and stop reverse And you'll notice that I can more accurately control the rate of progression. This can be particularly useful if you want to talk about certain periods in time where, say, immigration popped or dropped in a pretty dramatic fashion, or perhaps a world event was occurring and you want to address what the immigration rate looked like around that time. So these are the basics of what a time series data can do inside your map viewer. Now, if I open up the map details, much like we did the other day, and take a look at what's going on inside the map, you'll notice that we are again looking at the main GeoInquiry map, and as before we mentioned that each layer is listed here, and our particular layer that we were using time series data on was this history of immigration layer. So I'm going to go ahead and take a quick look at it. Now, this service actually has a number of layers in it. So, and I am not logged in right now. So there's not a whole lot I can see here that's going to tell me too much. So what I'm going to do in this particular case is log in. And I should now be logged in. And I'm going to make my own data layer. And in this case, I'm going to bounce over to Excel. And I have constructed a 4 records spreadsheet. You'll notice my first column is date. I've defined a fictional event in column B, and then latitude and longitude in column C and D. And yes, I went very, very simple here. So what I've done is saved this spreadsheet out and indicated that this in fact is a date field. And then I've uploaded it into ArcGIS Online. Now the difference here, and the reason I'm showing this to you, is because I now own this data layer. So if you're looking at data that you own in particular, we can look and verify it's the same data. You'll see my same 4 records here. But if I go over to my overview tab, you'll notice there's something very special now that's here that wasn't there before. And it's this time settings link. So right now, ArcGIS Online is just thinking this data is like any other data that might get uploaded. I've got my coordinates, I'm going to throw it on a map. But if we tell ArcGIS Online that there is in fact some relevant time data in here, we can enable the time data. And in fact, if we look down our list of options here, we can pretty much just stay with the defaults in order to keep our example here as straightforward as possible. So I think I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And then I'm going to go ahead and open it up inside of the map viewer. And I'm just going to load it on top of its in its own map. I'll hit done. So the auto cartography is there. I'm going to back it up a little bit. Now you may recall that I spanned several decades here and I only had 4 points on the map. So there's not going to be a lot of data here. So one thing we might want to do is we go back to that configure tool and let's look at our advanced options. And remember I mentioned that ability to, as time passes, only display one piece of data or progressively display data. Let's flip it over to progressive, just because there's only 4 data points anyway. So my time slider is visible at the bottom. In this case, we're going to go ahead and hit the play button. And I may need to change my base map to see these records begin to pop. So our first one is visible here. We've got another one that popped here. And Charlie, do you see the other one? I've lost it. It's hiding there.
Lake Huron.
Let's try it with a different base map. And tell you the other thing I'm going to do is go ahead and open up the range. Let's switch our base maps. Any recommendations from the team?
Let's go with a light gray.
Light,
You know my answer.
light gray. Okay. So in this case, let's drag our time slider.
So there you can see all 4 of them.
Wonderful. And it's because of that auto styling that we enabled that we've got a little bit different colors visible here. So again, it's not too terribly difficult to make your own time series data if you're collecting the time and then the column that the time data is in is properly formatted before you upload your spreadsheet into ArcGIS Online. I think up next, some of my other colleagues are going to be talking more about data publication, and they'll further help clarify some of these steps for you. All right?
All right, thanks, Tom. It's a neat look. Thanks for taking the time to show us all of that. Sorry, I couldn't resist. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now, and you will see something that might look a little bit familiar to you. All right, so now you're seeing a map of some earthquake data. Now it looks similar to the one you saw with me in the last episode, and there's a really good reason for that. And that reason is that I'm actually using the same data. So right now, we're going to look over here on the left and notice that we have two different layers in our map. I've named them to help you identify where they came from. The first is our CSV by drag and drop, right? We went to the earthquake website yesterday. We downloaded a CSV, similar to the stuff Joseph was just showing you earlier. We dragged and dropped it right into the map. And that gave one of our layers there. Now, if we look at our other layer, this one's coming from the web URL. And again, we did that yesterday. We went to add. We used adding a layer from the web. You know, again, Joseph showed another example of this earlier. And that's great. This is two ways to get your data easily onto the map. But there's another, and it has some other powers that come with it that I wanted to make sure you were familiar with. So another way that you can add data is to go ahead and jump over into your content. Now you can do that from the home menu here and picking content. And I'm going to go ahead and open that in a new tab. When I jump over here into the content, you can see this map. Well, that is the map I was just looking at, if you happen to catch the title at the top there. And I have this ability to add an item. Well, great. I have a CSV. I'd like to add it to the map or add it to the content I have available to me in ArcGIS Online. So I'm going to go ahead and pick that, and it's on my computer. So this is that same CSV that we downloaded. I'm going to go ahead and choose a file, and you'll see my downloads location. And just like yesterday, there's our 2.5 magnitude earthquakes over the last month. And here you can even see a preview. Remember when we looked at that in Notepad? Not so readable, but don't worry, the map will make it better. So go ahead and open that file. You can see it gives it a name, and you can do some tags. We talked about tags in an earlier episode as well. Those are going to be really important when you're sharing and searching for this data. So let's add some useful tags. In this case, it's a demo, so it's important to me that I remember why I made it. And it's also about earthquakes. So we'll go with those two tags. I'd also like to give it a better name, and I'm just going to add on here from computer. To remind myself, this is coming from adding an item from my computer, since what we're looking at is the differences in these different ways of adding our data. Let's go down a little bit and we can explore here. Now, one item is this checkbox. Publish this file as a hosted layer. Adds a hosted layer item. I might not know what that means, right? We haven't really talked about hosted layers, but I know I want a layer because that's how I get data into my map. So what if I don't do that? What happens? Oh, well, a lot of my options go away. And I know Joseph was talking earlier about how we pick the fields for mapping and that being important. So I'm pretty sure I don't want to do that. And I'll give you a hint. What happens if you don't check this is it publishes it kind of like a file share, like uploading it to your Google Docs or your OneDrive account. So let's go ahead and leave that on because we want this to be actually something we can use in a map. If I look down here, you may remember from yesterday that we had columns for latitude and longitude. And so actually it's over here. You can see those field names, the latitude, the longitude. You can see actually all those columns from yesterday. There's our magnitude and depth. And let's see what it's going to use in order to locate these features, right? Well, it's not using the time, and it's been able to correctly identify that the latitude and longitude fields should be used as the latitude and longitude location fields. If we take a quick scroll, we'll notice that everything else is just not used. That's probably what I want because that is the important information. Another option I have here is looking at the time zone. Now, this is important if I have time in my data because of how ArcGIS Online works with time and assumes it's in UTC or Coordinated Universal Time, as you can see here. That's the default. So if my spreadsheet happens to be done in a different time zone, this will help ArcGIS Online correct that for me when it's putting that data into the map. So that's why you want to pay a little bit of attention there if you have time data, like Tom was just showing us. All right. Let's go ahead and add this item. Now what this is going to do is you can see it's publishing a service. So yesterday we grabbed a URL, and Joseph showed some examples too today of services that exist out there that you can go and bring into your map. Well, right now I'm making one. So similar to that, it's creating a URL of this that will allow me to access this data. And the data itself is being stored in the cloud or online, however you like to picture that. So here we go. We've got our layer. We can see the item page like we looked at a few episodes ago. I can add a summary about it. I can do a description. And really, if I've done this in order to share my data, I would want to make sure I populate that metadata. It is really important for that authenticity of our data and so that others can evaluate it for themselves. Right now, I'm not going to get into that because, again, you saw it a few episodes ago. And as a reminder, if you did miss that a few episodes ago, go back and watch it. So let's go ahead and we're going to open in Map Viewer. Go ahead and click on that to bring it into my map. We're going to look. Here we go. So we're getting to do the same styling, all the same stuff as before. I'm just going to accept the defaults. Now, actually, this isn't quite what I wanted. It put it into a new map. I'd like to see it next to my other layers. So I can jump back over to my other map. While I'm here, let's get rid of that menu. I can go ahead and add. Now, when I search for layers to add, there's something that this is something we've done before. But you can notice the default was my content. And so it makes it really easy to find the stuff I own. And I can add that right into my map. All right, let's get rid of that now that we've added it. And you can see all 3 layers. I like to keep them in order that I was thinking about. So I'm going to go ahead and drag it down. You can see I just grabbed it and I'm just dragging it down to put it in a new order. I can go ahead, like I've done for the other layers, and I can rename it. And we can just say from upload, right? And publish, since that's what we've done here, and say OK. Now, you can see this same data on the map. And you can see there's a little bit of differences, right? Because one of the things we talked about yesterday is it was live data. So sometimes you're going to get a few differences based on exactly when you've added this data or when you've downloaded and grabbed the feed. So we're not too worried about that. We can see the majority overlaps. Right now, what I would rather focus on is actually looking at some of the differences between these layers. So it is really similar data. When do I want to drag and drop? When do I want to use a web URL? And when should I actually upload and publish my data? All right, to understand that, the first thing I'm going to do is show you some of the options we have. I'm going to show you quickly. When we click on here, you can see we have some different tools available, and we have some things in the menu here. Now, I've made an image, and I'm going to go ahead and drag that onto the screen. So hopefully you guys can see my image now. And what this is it's 3 screen captures of what those different menus and options look like. And I've circled a few differences here because those are some things I want to talk about. Over here in the one I've added from my computer in particular, you can see this little yellow tool looks kind of like a funnel. Let's go explore that for a second because that one's pretty powerful. On this layer that I've published, I have this extra tool. Now, these top tools right here are ones that have been promoted here because they're pretty important or commonly used. So a difference there is going to have a little bit more impact than some of the other differences. And in fact, this is a filter. Well, let's check it out. What if, say I grabbed all this data, but in reality, I want to see the ones where the magnitude is greater than, let's say 4.0. I can now apply this filter. And if we turn off these other layers so we can focus on our new one, we can compare, right? There was a lot more data before I did that. You can see now I'm only looking at earthquakes with a magnitude greater than 4. So that allowed me to filter my data. We've talked about filtering, right? That whole idea of when we left-handed, we're going to raise our hand, that selection, you can see who's left-handed and who's not. But when we filter, all those right-handed people, remember Tom and Charlie and Joseph, they all disappeared. They ducked down and hid under their desks, right? And that's what we've done here. We've taken all those smaller magnitude quakes and we've filtered them out of the picture. So if we think about GIS and the types of analysis we can do, that can be very powerful to find and understand patterns. So by publishing that data, we gain that filter button. And that's really key here. Now, you may have noticed a few other options that image I showed. I can go ahead and bring it back up for a second. We talked about refresh interval the other day, right? How often does my data refresh? Now, if you think about it, does it make sense to refresh your data if you've dragged and dropped it? Well, no, that's static data. It's not changing. It's only existing right in that one map because you dropped it in. So you don't need to be able to refresh it. A web URL, well, yeah, that's live data, right? Even though Charlie's earthquake map was months old, it was only the last 30 days of earthquakes. Refresh interval, very important. With this data I've published, it's up to me because I own the data, how often I change it. Maybe I want to upload a new CSV or override it and make it more recent every month. It depends what I'm using that data for, right? And so their refresh interval may be important again. All right, let's go ahead and get rid of that image. So we have talked a little bit about the different options that you get on these layers and why you might have one. And we talked about how that published layer you can filter, really powerful. We've talked about how your web URL, though, it's live, right? So there's a trade-off there that you kind of have to choose what's important for the project you're working on and the types of analysis you're going to do. Another key difference is that I mentioned the drag and drop data, right? It just lives in this map. It's just a copy. Now, if I in a web URL, I can add that to any map I want to. If I go over to this data that I've published, and let's jump back into the content, and we're going to go ahead and refresh because it doesn't show the thing that I just added during this demo. You can see now, oh, it put the CSV, so it has a copy of that still. And it also has that hosted feature layer. That's the thing I've actually added to the map. So we'll jump back into the item page for that. And as we've talked about in previous episodes, you can share things in ArcGIS Online. We talked more about maps then, right? And letting other people share your maps. But you can do the same with your data. So say I'm working with a classroom and we're going to do a project on earthquakes, and everyone might be focusing on something different. Maybe some students are exploring patterns in depth, others in patterns in magnitude. I've made this data and I just want to share it with everyone so they can put it in their maps. They can change it the way they want. They can symbolize it, filter it, work with it, do their own analysis, come up with their own results. But do all of them need to upload a copy? No, that's not necessary. Instead, I can come on in here and I can share. Now, in a classroom, we've talked a little bit about this. I probably just want to share with my organization, which may be my school, my district, depending on how you've set up your org. Or in this case, if you've gotten a temporary login, you'd be sharing with us, right? The K-12 org. And we love seeing your data, so we don't mind. And you can share it. And the people who need access have that access. All right, so I'll go ahead and save it. So if anyone else, Tom, Charlie, you need to make a map of earthquakes today, feel free to use this one. It's pretty recent. It'll take you through most of March. I'm not going to update it again, so it'll just be the data from that. It's not the same as that web URL. It's not going to show them the earthquakes that happen later today. But that gives you a look at some of those trade-offs you have. Now, I'm going to show you one other thing because we've looked at different ways to add this data to the map. And I want to show you kind of a shortcut. So one thing you saw, if you were paying attention, is here in these options, I can save layer. This is the drag and drop. Wait. We said that only lives in this map. Yeah, it does. That's why it might be important to save it. And if I was to choose to save that layer, we can just go ahead. I'm just going to give it a quick tag here. Again, my metadata is not the best while I'm demoing. Make sure yours is a little bit better than that. Create this item. Well, my content, creating an item in my content. This is kind of a shortcut to that workflow you just saw where I put the CSV, I went to add item, put it in there. Very similar. But perhaps you're not sure if you want to add this particular CSV to your my content. Drag and drop it into your map. Evaluate your data. Look at if it's good. Look at that. Is it accurate? Like Joseph found some of those high points he mapped weren't really mapping in the right spot. Maybe he didn't really want to upload that and use it. Someone else might think it was right. So this is taking a second here, so we're not going to worry too much about it. What you would see when it completes is you'll get another item details page, and from that page, there's a publish button. Oh, great. Here we go. So it's finished publishing. We can jump back over into my content. I'm going to get away from this item page and go back to that whole folder. And look, here's my CSV by drag and drop. But there's a difference. One's a feature layer, and one's a feature layer hosted. The key thing there is this isn't quite the same yet. What I need to do, there's one more step, and that is to come in here, and like we did with the other data, we had to publish it. At this point, I can publish, and I happen to know I can't have special characters in the name, so I'm going to go ahead and fix that before I publish. Add published, and we can go ahead and publish the service. Look, publishing service. All right, so here's another way we can do kind of the same thing. So if you do want to analyze that data first before you publish it into your org, great. Drag and drop it, analyze it, and then you'll be able to just work right on through and publish. And look, here we have all those options we had before. All right, thanks for playing along with me. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Charlie now to continue our discussion.
Thanks, Kylie. That was great. That was really a powerful demo of the capacities that everybody has. That whole issue of publishing is really key, because when you get a really good data set and you want to make it available to other people, and you take the time and put the metadata into it, that's expanding that value of GIS, the work that you've done, and making it available for other people. GIS is about sharing.
One thing I want to throw in that I forgot to mention that's going to be important to people as they do this workflow and want to share this data is the concept of publishing. It does require the permissions to do it. So if you've gotten one of those temporary logins from us for the mapping hour, that's going to have the permission you need to publish. If you have a login in your own org and you're not seeing the option to do those publishing things, that's what you want to look for, is contact your org admin and ask them, hey, I can't publish. Is that something you can grant to me? Is there a reason I can't do that? And they'll be able to work with you to find out how you need to do that.
Exactly. That's really key, is to make sure. And so let me go ahead and share my screen, and we can start talking about that, because what we've got here is, here you're right now looking at the org, the K-12 org that is hosting the mapping hour activities. And I'm logged in this case, as an admin, so that I can come in and play with the settings and look at them and see. I can go down the left-hand side and see what are the roles. And publisher, let's look at the description. So I've clicked on the little blue eye. Publishers have user privileges, so they've got the same privileges that general users have, plus the ability to publish their features and map tiles as hosted web layers. They can share their content as ready-to-go layers with others. They can also perform analysis on layers and maps. So those two key features, publishing and performing an analysis, they go together, and they're really important for being able to do the really powerful things that you want to do inside of ArcGIS Online. Now, I mentioned this ArcGIS Online Organizations for Schools documents before, and there's the address for it. Inside it is a page that is, how are these roles and privileges set? Now, there are a variety of built-in roles inside of any ArcGIS Online organization. And then, as you can see on the far right side, there is the opportunity to make custom roles. So let's just look at the first 5 in here. Admins can do anything. Publishers, they look just like users, except they have these 2 other important elements. They can publish hosted web layers. They can perform analysis. These are the really important capacities. So those of you who have your own organization, see if you are a publisher or an admin. If you're one of those, you're ready to go. If you're listed as a user, then you'll want to start exploring whether you can get access to the publisher level capacities to do some of the things that we're going to be doing. It takes a role with the publishing privilege. So it takes a little bit of getting used to these things inside of an ArcGIS Online organization. Roles have privileges, and when you log in, there is a specific role associated with that login. The admin can change those roles. The roles have privileges. So we'll come back and talk about this a little bit further, but for now, just know that these powers are really important. one of the other things that happens when you're publishing is that you're using the power of the system to do some thinking and to do some data creation and to do some data storage on your behalf. And that uses up a little bit of credits. Think of credits like sort of like phone minutes, or if you have a data plan that says you have so many megabytes and things like that. Think of what Kylie did just then as using some portion of a penny, because she didn't have too many points to publish, and it's pretty straightforward to do just publishing of dots because they knew where they had to go. When Joseph is publishing a set of 100 street addresses, address, city, state, zip, and the system has to say, okay, I got to go through here and figure out 100 times where each of these points are, and then I can publish a dot for it. That takes more capacity. It takes more credits to do that. So inside this Orgs for Schools doc, you can read about publishing and credits and all of that. But for now, just focus on the capacity of publishing and doing analysis with a publisher level credential. All right, it's time for a review. Geocoding, time-based data. I love that time-based stuff. That's really fun to explore. Publishing, and these roles and credits. Now, within that, Joseph was talking about geocoding by address, geocoding by place name, and where that dot goes. If it just says a zip code, here's this family at this zip code, or here's this thing that is in this state. Going to drop a dot in the center of the zip code or the center of the state. That's a really important piece that a lot of teachers have gotten stuck with, is where does this go? I was expecting a large polygon. We'll talk about that in a future time. Time-based data, drag and drop versus add to content like Kylie was doing. That publishing, creating a feature service, a service that presents geographic features that you can do things with. And then roles and privileges and credits. Wow, covers a lot. Where can we see more about this? Well, you can check out that GeoInquiry that Tom was working with inside the GeoInquiry zone. The Orgs for Schools doc, that's the same address that you're seeing there. Remember that at the Mapping Hour homepage, that's where you can see all those other videos or get a login if you don't have one. The teachwithgis.com site has a couple of interesting lessons that relate to this one. And we actually used this first one in reference to episode 6 because it was all about adding point data, but it takes advantage of a couple of different versions that you see there. So it's a good one. Go see that one. And then steps 1 through 3 in this responding to an earthquake lesson that is inside that same zone. This is an earthquake situation, a real life earthquake situation that you can read about if you're responding to that situation. Then down in the Learn site, there is Depict Land Use Change with Time-Enabled Apps. This is one that is looking at imagery, several different layers, and watching the change over time. This is a really cool one. So take a look at those, practice, explore, try, attempt, do it again and again, and we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.